At 300 feet down, the water simply changed. Not gradually, almost like a wall. The cameras that had been recording brilliant blue water, sea turtles, and reef sharks suddenly went dark, and the pilot inside the submersible watched the readouts confirm what her instruments had already been warning her about. Zero oxygen, ahead and below, in every direction. She was about to drop through a layer of toxic gas that had been sitting undisturbed at the bottom of one of the most famous holes in the ocean for centuries, into a space that, as far as anyone in the vessel with her knew, no human being had ever actually seen with their own eyes. What she and her crew found on the other side of that layer would end up making global headlines, not because it was supernatural, but because it was real, and because some of it was exactly the kind of thing you hope you never actually find at the bottom of the ocean. And some of it, more quietly, was the kind of thing that says less about the ocean itself and more about everyone who has ever stood at its edge. This is the story of the December 2018 expedition to Belize's Great Blue Hole, and to understand why reaching its floor took until 2018, despite the hole being famous since the 1970s, you first need to understand exactly what this place actually is. The Great Blue Hole sits roughly 70 kilometers off the coast of Belize, near the center of Lighthouse Reef, part of the larger Belize Barrier Reef Reserve System, a UNESCO World Heritage Site, and the second largest barrier reef network on Earth after Australia's Great Barrier Reef, stretching for hundreds of kilometers along the country's coastline and supporting an ecosystem that draws divers and researchers from around the world independent of the blue hole itself. From above, it looks almost unreal. A nearly perfect dark circle, 318 meters across, cut into the middle of a shallow turquoise reef, plunging straight down to a depth of 124 meters, a contrast so stark between the shallow, sunlit reef surrounding it and the sudden darkness at its center that the formation is instantly recognizable from satellite photographs alone, without any caption or context needed. Its origin traces back to the last glacial period, when global sea levels sat far lower than they do today, at points more than 100 meters below current levels. What is now a flooded marine sinkhole was, tens of thousands of years ago, a dry limestone cave system slowly carved out by rainwater dissolving the rock the way limestone caves form all over the world, through the same slow chemical process responsible for cave networks from Kentucky's Mammoth Cave to the cenotes of Mexico's Yucatan Peninsula. Stalactites, the icicle-shaped mineral formations that only grow in open air as water drips slowly from a cave ceiling, formed deep inside this cave over thousands of years, a process that requires the cave to be genuinely dry and air-filled, not underwater, meaning every stalactite ever found inside the Great Blue Hole is, by definition, physical proof that this entire space was once open to the sky. Then, as the last ice age ended and global sea levels rose over thousands of years, the cave flooded, and at some point the roof of its main chamber collapsed entirely, leaving behind the vertical, nearly cylindrical shaft that divers and satellites recognize today. Those original stalactites are still down there, some of them found tilted at a consistent angle partway down the hole's interior wall, physical proof that the entire block of surrounding limestone actually shifted after they'd already formed, a detail that gives geologists a direct physical timestamp for exactly when this collapse occurred. The Great Blue Hole owes much of its global fame to one specific expedition, decades before the one this story is actually about. In 1971, the French oceanographer and filmmaker Jacques Cousteau brought his research vessel Calypso to the site, reportedly blasting a channel through part of the surrounding reef, specifically to get his ship into position, and declared it one of the finest diving sites on the planet. That endorsement, broadcast to a global television audience already captivated by Cousteau's ocean documentaries, is largely responsible for turning this remote sinkhole into one of the most recognizable natural landmarks in the world, ranked by the Discovery Channel in 2012 as the single most amazing place on Earth. But Cousteau's original visit, for all its fame, never actually reached the true floor of the hole. His team explored its upper reaches and confirmed the presence of the stalactite formations, but the deepest sections, more than 300 feet down, remained completely unexplored for almost another 50 years, simply because getting a human being safely down that far and back up again, through what turns out to be a genuinely hostile chemical environment, requires equipment and expertise that didn't widely exist for a project like this until relatively recently. For the better part of 5 decades, the Great Blue Hole existed in a strange dual state, one of the most photographed, most dived, most instantly recognizable natural formations on the planet, and simultaneously a place whose actual deepest secrets remained completely undocumented, guarded not by any legend or restriction, but simply by pressure, darkness, and chemistry that recreational diving equipment was never built to survive. That gap finally closed in December 2018, when Jacques Cousteau's own grandson, Fabien Cousteau, an accomplished underwater explorer in his own right, who has spent much of his career continuing his family's tradition of ocean research, joined a new expedition specifically organized to finish what his grandfather had started nearly 5 decades earlier. The mission was led by Aquatica Submarines and funded through Virgin Voyages, the venture backed by billionaire Richard Branson, who personally joined the dive as well, riding down in one of the two submersibles alongside the professional crew rather than simply funding the operation from the surface. The technical work fell primarily to Erica Bergman, Aquatica's chief pilot and a National Geographic explorer with genuine expertise in deep submersible operations, alongside Mark Atherton, the expedition's sonar specialist, and a wider supporting team of scientists, filmmakers, and submersible experts. Over roughly 2.5 weeks, from late November through mid-December 2018, the team conducted more than 20 individual dives into the hull using 2 separate manned submersibles, Aquatica's own 3-person Stingray 500 and a second vessel called the Idabel, operated by the Roatan Institute of Deep Sea Exploration. Working alongside sonar equipment supplied by Kongsberg Mesotech, the team's explicit primary scientific goal was to produce the first complete 3-dimensional sonar map of the hull's entire interior, something that had simply never been done before, alongside direct visual and photographic documentation of whatever they found at depths no submersible, and likely no human being at all, had ever previously reached. For the first several hundred feet, the descent matched what generations of scuba divers exploring the hull's upper reaches had already documented. Clear, brilliant blue water, healthy coral structures along the walls, sea turtles, reef sharks, and the kind of vibrant marine activity that made this site famous in the first place. Then, at a depth of approximately 90 meters, roughly 300 feet, everything changed within what the pilots described as a strikingly narrow band. The submersibles passed directly into a distinct, physically separate layer of hydrogen sulfide, a colorless, corrosive, and highly toxic gas that had accumulated and settled at this specific depth, likely over a period of centuries, trapped in place because it's denser than the seawater sitting above it, and effectively sealed off from mixing with the oxygenated layers above by the hull's own steep, enclosed walls. Bergman later described the sensation of passing through this layer as feeling almost like dropping into an entirely different fluid altogether, distinct enough from the water above that the submersible's own cameras visibly shifted from clear blue imagery to close to total darkness within moments, and crew members reported being able to detect the layer's presence even through the sealed hull, describing a faint smell reminiscent of rotten eggs, the same distinctive odor hydrogen sulfide produces at far smaller concentrations. Below this layer, water testing conducted during the expedition confirmed the hull becomes completely anoxic, meaning dissolved oxygen levels drop effectively to zero. No sunlight penetrates this deep, and without oxygen or light, essentially nothing that requires either to survive can persist down there. That doesn't mean the space below the hydrogen sulfide layer was empty. It meant something considerably stranger. It functions as a kind of permanent chemical trap for anything that ends up falling into it. As the submersibles continued their descent below the anoxic boundary, their lights picked out what Bergman and her team came to describe almost casually as conch graveyards. Ordinary queen conches, a large marine snail common throughout Caribbean reef environments, occasionally wander or fall over the edge of the hull from the shallower rim above, drawn perhaps by currents or simply losing their footing on the steep drop-off that separates the shallow reef from the sinkhole's sheer inner walls. Once they cross into the anoxic zone below the hydrogen sulfide layer, they're unable to survive and unable to climb back out fast enough to reach oxygenated water again. Their shells accumulate on the sediment floor below, undisturbed by any scavenger or decomposing organism that would normally break them down in an oxygenated marine environment, since almost nothing capable of doing that work can survive at this depth. What normally happens to a dead conch shell on an ordinary reef, gradual breakdown by bacteria, scavenging crabs, and other marine life, simply doesn't happen down here, which is precisely why the shells accumulate rather than disappearing the way they would almost anywhere else in the ocean. Branson himself, describing the moment the team's lights first picked out the scene, wrote afterward that the crew hadn't expected to see any living creatures at all that far down, and instead found crabs, conches, and other animals that had fallen into the hole over an unknown span of time, arrived at the bottom, and simply run out of oxygen. Sediment naturally drifts over the shells and remains over time, meaning what's visible on the surface of the sediment at any given moment likely represents only the most recent layer of a much deeper, much older accumulation, extending down through the sediment itself, potentially preserving a slow, continuous record of exactly the same process repeating for centuries. Then the expedition encountered something considerably more sobering than conch shells. Near the floor of the hole, the crew located human remains, later confirmed to be the bodies of 2 divers who had previously gone missing at the site, out of a total of 3 people believed to have died there over the years, attempting deep dives beyond safe recreational limits. The team reported the discovery to Belizean authorities as required, and made a deliberate, respectful decision not to attempt bringing the remains back to the surface, choosing instead to leave them where they rested, effectively left as a burial at sea. It's a genuinely sobering detail to include honestly rather than gloss over, and it connects directly to a real, documented danger this specific site has posed for decades. The Great Blue Hole's extreme depth, its narrow vertical shaft, and the disorienting nitrogen narcosis that can affect even experienced divers well before they approach anything close to the anoxic layer have made it the site of multiple confirmed diver deaths over the years. A serious, real risk that exists entirely separate from anything mysterious about the hole itself, and one the expedition crew was acutely aware of throughout their own dives. Recreational divers visiting the Blue Hole today are generally restricted to depths well above the hydrogen sulfide layer, specifically because nitrogen narcosis, a condition that impairs judgment and coordination at depth in a way divers have long compared to alcohol. Intoxication becomes an increasingly serious risk the deeper a diver descends using standard scuba equipment, long before they would ever reach the toxic layer the submersibles passed through, with the benefit of a fully sealed, pressurized hull. That distinction matters for understanding exactly why this specific expedition required manned submersibles rather than simply sending down a team of well-equipped technical divers. No amount of training or specialized gas mixtures changes the basic fact that a human body exposed directly to water at that depth and pressure, let alone to a layer of toxic hydrogen sulfide gas, faces risks that a sealed vehicle simply doesn't. Alongside the conch shells and the human remains, the team's cameras also documented a considerably more mundane, but in its own way more disturbing, category of debris: ordinary human trash. Plastic bottles and other identifiable pieces of modern waste were found resting on the sediment floor more than 350 feet beneath the surface of what is otherwise one of the most pristine, carefully protected marine environments on the planet, a UNESCO World Heritage Site with formal legal protections specifically designed to prevent exactly this kind of contamination. Branson, reflecting on the expedition afterward, wrote plainly that people often ask about mythical sea monsters supposedly lurking in the depths of places like this, and that the real monsters facing the ocean turned out to be considerably less exotic: climate change and plastic. That detail, arguably more than the human remains or the toxic gas layer, is what turned this expedition's coverage into something that spread widely online well beyond typical ocean exploration audiences, precisely because it reframed a famous, remote natural wonder as a place that ordinary human carelessness had still managed to reach, even at a depth almost nobody would ever personally see for themselves. Coverage of the expedition years later continued to resurface, periodically online, specifically because of this detail, often shared explicitly as evidence of how thoroughly plastic pollution has spread, even into locations that most people would assume are far too remote and far too deep for ordinary trash to ever realistically reach. The expedition's final major discovery brought the story back to where Jacques Cousteau had left off nearly 50 years earlier. Continuing their descent all the way to the hole's true floor at approximately 124 meters, roughly 407 feet, the team located a set of stalactite formations that had never previously been mapped or documented by any prior expedition, sitting right at the deepest point of the entire structure. Bergman described locating them as a genuinely exciting moment specifically because they represented new discovery in the most literal sense. Physical features nobody had confirmed existed at that exact location before this dive. These stalactites, alongside the tilted formations found at shallower depths inside the hole, gave geologists working with the expedition's data a far more complete physical record of the site's original formation as a dry cave system, and of the specific geological event, the collapse of the cave's roof as sea levels rose, that ultimately transformed it into the underwater landmark it is today. Taken together, the formations found at multiple different depths inside the hole effectively let researchers reconstruct a rough timeline of the site's transformation. Stalactites still standing upright near the shallower reaches, likely formed earliest, before the ceiling above them eventually gave way, and the newly found deepest formations discovered right at the floor of the hole, representing either the final stage of that same dry cave period or a distinct separate phase of formation that hadn't previously been confirmed to exist at all. Beyond the individual discoveries, the expedition's broader scientific contribution was the sonar mapping work itself, which produced the first genuinely complete three-dimensional model of the hole's entire interior structure. That data, described by the team as a detailed mesh-layered scan capturing the full 1,000-foot diameter of the formation, was made available to the Belizean government following the expedition, intended to support ongoing conservation and management of a site that sits within a formally protected UNESCO World Heritage Marine Reserve. Prior to this expedition, even something as basic as the hole's precise internal shape below the upper reaches accessible to recreational divers had never been fully confirmed, meaning conservation authorities were, in a real sense, managing and protecting a site whose exact underlying structure they didn't yet have complete data on. A short documentary covering the 22 dives conducted between late November and mid-December 2018 was released the following spring, walking through the hydrogen sulfide layer, the conch graveyards, and the newly mapped stalactite formations in detail for a wider public audience beyond the initial wave of news coverage, giving the expedition's findings a second, more lasting life well beyond the initial headlines generated by Branson and Cousteau's involvement. It's worth being precise about what this expedition actually represents scientifically, because the honest version of this story doesn't require any exaggeration to be genuinely striking. This wasn't a search for anything supernatural, and nothing recovered or documented during the 20-plus dives pointed toward anything outside well-understood marine chemistry and geology. Hydrogen sulfide layers, while less commonly documented at this specific scale and depth, are a recognized phenomenon in certain enclosed or poorly circulated marine and lake environments around the world, forming wherever organic decomposition outpaces the rate at which oxygenated water can mix in and replenish a confined space, a similar underlying mechanism to the anoxic deep layers found in some fjords and enclosed seas elsewhere on the planet. Anoxic marine zones, similarly, are well documented and increasingly studied phenomena, not just as isolated curiosities, but as a growing global concern, since expanding low-oxygen dead zones driven partly by human-caused nutrient pollution are affecting coastal waters in multiple regions around the world today, from the Gulf of Mexico to parts of the Baltic Sea, making the blue hole's naturally occurring anoxic layer a genuinely useful, isolated case study for researchers trying to understand how these zones behave and persist over long timescales. What made the Great Blue Hole expedition significant wasn't that it uncovered some entirely unprecedented natural phenomenon. It was that a well-known, already famous landmark, visited by recreational divers for decades and immortalized on film since 1971, still had an entire chemically hostile world sitting at its true floor that nobody had ever actually seen directly until a team with the right combination of submersible technology, funding, and expertise finally went and looked. Consider what the complete shape of this expedition actually represents, because it holds together as a genuinely remarkable, fully documented undertaking without needing a single invented detail. A geological formation with a documented origin stretching back to the last ice age, first brought to global fame by one of history's most celebrated ocean explorers in 1971, sat with its true floor completely unexplored for nearly 5 decades. Not because nobody was curious, but because the specific chemical and physical conditions guarding that floor, extreme pressure, complete darkness, and a genuinely toxic oxygen-free layer of hydrogen sulfide made it inaccessible to anything short of purpose-built manned submersibles. When that expedition finally happened in December 2018, led in part by the original explorer's own grandson, it produced exactly the kind of findings that make for a genuinely complicated, honest story rather than a simple triumphant one. A groundbreaking, complete 3D map of the entire structure, newly discovered stalactites confirming decades of geological theory about the hole's formation, an eerie but scientifically explicable graveyard of conch shells, trapped by an anoxic dead zone, the genuinely sobering discovery of human remains handled with real care and respect. And, sitting on the sediment alongside all of it, ordinary plastic waste that had somehow made its way down into one of the most remote, most carefully protected natural wonders on the planet. Every individual piece of this holds up under real scrutiny. The last glacial period explains the hole's original formation as a dry limestone cave. The post-glacial sea level rise explains the roof collapse that created the vertical shaft divers know today. Basic marine chemistry explains both the hydrogen sulfide layer and the anoxic dead zone beneath it. But, taken together, spanning nearly 50 years between Cousteau's original visit and his grandson finally completing the journey to the true bottom, this amounts to something genuinely rare in modern ocean exploration. A place famous enough that millions of people have seen photographs of it, swum in its upper reaches, or watched documentaries about it, that still managed to keep its deepest, strangest secrets completely hidden until a fully resourced, professionally led expedition finally went far enough down to find them. There's something worth sitting with in that gap between fame and actual knowledge. A location can sit at the center of global attention for decades, appear on countless postcards and travel lists, and still, at the exact same time, remain functionally unexplored where it matters most, simply because visibility from above and genuine physical access to what lies beneath are two completely different things. If this made you think differently about what's actually sitting at the true bottom of the ocean's most famous landmarks, subscribe, because every week we look at the real documented expeditions that finally answered questions decades in the making. And the Great Blue Hole, even after 50 years of fame, only gave up its full story in the last few years. And even then, gave it up in pieces that turned out to be far more complicated than a simple headline could ever fully capture.